Today on Detroit Muscle, we're gonna class it up with a new project car that's all about the size. Plus, take a gander at the 1,100 horses that we're plugging into it.
If you've been watching the show, which you should be, you know that the last few cars we built have been pony car projects from each of the big three. These cars are small and nimble, and they present an opportunity to throw a good amount of power into a light package.
But we feel like it's time to change things up a bit. After all, the original early 60s muscle cars were all much larger than any pony platforms that came later on. And that tradition continued well into the 70s with huge displacement power plants, which were married to class and luxury. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, girl. You don't know about our 1972 Mercury Marquis Broham. The inside of this baby is big enough for all your friends. And you ain't gonna want us to go. Because when we do, so does the party, baby. But that's not all she's got going on. That's 19 feet of pure fever. Bigger than any car we've ever worked on. This ride floats down the road like an angel on a cloud, and that illustrious 429 sings like one too.
Well, we got our big old Mercury in the shop and we're ready to get started on it. Now I know that this platform isn't what we normally kick on here in the shop, but we've got some pretty big plans for it, and we're gonna call it the Highwayman. The reason for that, in the 1960s and ending in 70, Mercury produced the Marauder. Now in 69 and 70, they share the same platform as this car. And they made about 20,000 of those, and they were powered by either the 390 or that big old 429. And another word for Marauder is Highwayman.
Now, in order for our Merc to live up to that outlaw name we've given it, it really needs to bring the thunder when it comes to power output. And all of that revolves around this baby right here. This is a 557 cubic inch big block that the guys down at Engine Power built a while back. With this, we're skipping all of the conventional power plant possibilities and going straight to the nuclear option. Just how nuclear are we talking? How about almost 1,100 horsepower? They started out with a 460 block, an Eagle rotating assembly, some Trick Flow 325 power port heads, along with their R-Series manifold, topped off with a Holley 1150 Dominator. Oh, and they flung a big old shot of nitrous at it too. The block is bored 80 over, and a set of forged rods along with forged pistons rounded out the bottom end. A solid roller cam, double roller timing set, and Trick Flow 1.73 ratio rockers brought it all together.
But once it was in the dyno room, that's when things got really impressive. They made all of their pulls on 93 octane pump gas, and starting with 30 degrees of total timing. They made some naturally aspirated runs.
Yes, sir! 754.
664 for torque.
That is awesome, awesome, awesome.
Then they plugged in an NOS Big Shot kit and jetted it for 225 horsepower. The timing was dropped to 22 degrees to accommodate the nitrous.
That was big. That was big for torque. I saw big torque numbers.
Woo! So big it's off the graph. Let's rescale it.
It's off the graph.
Oh, 1,031 on power, 996 pound-feet of torque.
Once they checked the plugs and bumped the nitrous shot up to 300, along with pulling timing to 19 degrees, what did that make?
1,080 on power, 1,119 pound-feet.
And all that was done on pump gas. So needless to say, even with a car this size and that much power, well, this dude is gonna boogie. But you gotta make sure that the rest of the car can handle all that power.
That's right, because the 429 that came from the factory, it's only making around 200 horsepower. And because we're gonna be throwing over 5 times that much power at it, we got some work to do.
The next thing that we gotta do is get all that old junk out of the way.
Now, I know this pan may look like it's on backwards, but I promise you that it's not. Our car requires a front sump pan because of the location of the crossmember. The pan that was on this engine was a rear sump, so we got a new pickup, new pan from Summit Racing, and we went ahead and got those installed.
Now, whenever you're making the power level that we are, you've got to think downstream just a bit, kind of like the transmission, because if it won't hold it, well, that's a whole lot of work for nothing. So we went with a Mega Monster from Monster Transmission. This thing's had a boatload of internal work done to it to accept that big power number, kind of like a recalibrated valve body, custom machined parts to accept more clutches, and a custom accumulator. And this piece is going to do more than just get the job done for us. Another important piece to the puzzle is the torque converter. So we went with the 19 to 2300 stall HD 10-inch converter. Now this thing's tailored fit to meet our specifications. It comes with everything you need to do the install, including the fluid and the dipstick. And it's just about time for us to bolt this transmission and engine together.
Coming up, we'll plug in that nasty big block and show you how headers are able to free up power.
I want to know why they call these things flex plates. Anyway, we got our block plate reinstalled, and we got this new flex plate from Meziere. It's billet steel, and it's zero balance, which is perfect because our engine is internally balanced. We found some ARP bolts, got those things torqued to specs.
Now we're ready to tie these two together.
All right, a little bit. All right, we're gonna need to go up some. Come on, come on. We needed new motor mounts and a starter, so we went to rockauto.com to get those.
All right, guys, you might notice that the inside of the engine bay here looks a little bit different than it did before. We went ahead and did quite a bit of cleaning and sprayed on some flat black. That way, when we drop that big piece of jewelry off into that hole, it's gonna look really nice in there.
Looks good. We've said it before and we'll say it again. These engine tilters are a lifesaver when it comes to swapping engines and transmissions. They let you angle the tail of that trans down to get into the tunnel and make it easier to keep the oil pan off your sheet metal.
It's not every day that you get to see what a gussied up motor like this looks like sitting in a big old land yacht, but today is the day. May have to massage it. Now with that big stroker motor sitting at home looking all nice and pretty, it's time to move on toward the exhaust. Now originally our car came with exhaust manifolds, but with that highly modified engine, if we were to use them, they wouldn't be doing us any favors. So we opted for a set of these long tube headers from Hooker. And these are originally designed to fit an early 70s Torino, but we went ahead and trial fit them and they're going to work for us just fine.
Now most of you have probably always heard that headers will help you make more power, but you're not sure why or how that works. Well, one part of it is freeing up airflow, but there's more to it than that.
On a factory-style exhaust manifold, the passageways are typically a rudimentary design and are simply there to provide a route for the exhaust gases to exit toward the tailpipe. The problem with this is that due to the timing of the exhaust pulses, the collector on the manifold can form a bottleneck and make it more difficult for your engine to push exhaust gases through the system, especially when you've made modifications to the engine.
A good set of headers are designed around the timing of the pulses. Not only are the primary tubes much larger, but each tube is calibrated with the firing order of the engine accounted for. They allow the pulses to pass through the collector without creating a bottleneck, and can even provide the added benefit of a small scavenging effect which pulls the succeeding pulse through the system after it. Together, these differences free up the exhaust flow, which frees up more power.
Now that's the short but sweet version because there's a lot of science behind making a good set of headers. It's kind of like, typically you're going to make more power with a long set of tubes as opposed to a set of shorties. And it's an almost guarantee that you're going to make more power with a set of headers than a set of those exhaust manifolds.
Still ahead, check out the eye candy we've got to go under the hood of that big Mercury.
Hey guys, while you were gone, we decided to go ahead and switch out our valve covers. Now the reason we did that is because these sheet metal valve covers are really bulky and they were really close to the AC box there in the back. So we went ahead and got some tapered ones from Trick Flow. They're cast and they give a little bit more room in the back there, so when the engine moves, it's not going to get into that case. Now, next thing we're going to do is get some accessories bolted on here.
To get all that done, we went to Summit Racing and got us a full Serpentine setup from March Performance. And this kit comes with everything you're going to need to get the job done. And this is almost a must since we're plus 1,000 horsepower. Otherwise, with those V-groove belts, well, we'd be fighting putting them things on all the time. But the first piece to this puzzle is installing this crank pulley. This is a pretty simple deal. It's just 3 bolts that hold it onto the front of the balancer. Now, in the case of our alternator, we're going to reuse the stock one. Some WD-40 will make the old pulley easy to get off. With that out of the way, we'll hit it with some brake cleaner to get any of the nasty stuff off of there.
This thing would look pretty goofy as it is with all those shiny pieces, so we need to get it masked up for paint. With the terminals good and protected, we'll bust out a can of Dupli-Color engine enamel in the trusty old black variety. Once that's dried for a little bit, we can flip the alternator over and finish spraying it. After a few minutes, we can unmask it and start installing those shiny bits.
With the water pump ready to go on, we'll lay down a bead of sealer on the mating surface, being sure to account for the water passages while we're at it. With the gasket in place, we'll toss another bead down for good measure. Then plug in our pump.
Now we can install that prettied up alternator using the brackets provided in the kit. Then the water pump pulley can go on to its new home. Of course, we need to toss in the idlers, tensioners, all that good stuff.
All right, guys, we're ready to move on to the next step of the process, which would be installing the power steering pump and our AC compressor. But we run into a small snag, if you will. And no big surprise, we're crossbreeding a GM pump to this Ford hose. But we've got an order and adapter. That's no real big deal, but it's going to take a little bit of digging to find out which one we're going to need exactly. So, We'll catch you guys after the break.
Stick around and we'll show you how to modify a crossmember to work with big exhaust.
Hey guys, while you were gone, we went ahead and buttoned up the rest of our belt drive and we went on to the cooling system. Now we installed a radiator fan combo from Summit Racing, and what you get is a 2-row aluminum radiator, the shroud, the fans, you even get a controller with all the wiring, and it only runs about $400, which is pretty good.
The headers we chose were for a Torino. In our car, well, it's a full size. They fit, but kinda didn't. Where they didn't is right here where the collector comes out. It's kind of running into or interfering with our crossmember. Now, we didn't show you the installation of the crossmember, but while we had it out, we went ahead and cleaned it up and sandblasted it because we knew we were going to have to do some welding on it. And here's our plan of attack. So what we're going to do is cut it across here and across here, remove that piece, and then weld in a big heavy U and move the U up toward the bottom of the floor. Now, you don't have to worry about the crossmember itself bouncing against the floor pan because it's stationary, but you do want to move it up so you can have plenty of room for your exhaust pipe to move around.
We'll bust out a screw jack to keep the transmission in place once the crossmember has been cut. Then, a straight edge helps to mark the cutting points. Some masking tape on the end of the headers will keep us from slinging any sparks into them or the engine. Then we're ready to cut. The bulk of the chopping can be done with a cutoff wheel. Then we'll bust out the body saw to finish it, since it's easier to get to the top layer of metal with that.
Measure across there, we're 6 1/4. Now this is that serious piece of metal that I was talking about. It's a piece of 5-inch, 1/2 inch thick angle iron. Now what we're going to use is a couple of pieces of this and weld it together to make our U-shaped piece. You could use a piece of flat bar, but then you've got to bend it. Not everybody has a way of bending a piece of metal that large. The crossmember itself is 4 1/2 inches wide, so we'll duplicate that here. Now obviously this is too wide, so we're going to have to do a little bit of trimming to get it down to that 6 1/4 that we're looking for. Now you could cut it just once and then try to weld it up. The problem with that, you don't have any good way to kind of clamp it in place and it's going to pull on you. So we're actually going to have to cut both of them to get our 6 1/4. I'm going to put a double bevel on here. With the metal being as thick as it is, it will help to ensure that we have a nice, strong joint. Now we're ready to weld this giant piece of metal up. Now if you were at home and you had a smaller welder, you could take a torch and preheat this thing and get it good and hot, and that'd help the penetration. But we've got those ESOB welders and they'll practically weld anything that'll hold still long enough. Also, with this being a piece of hot rolled, it's always a good idea to grind it back to that shiny side.
A couple of clamps are a good idea to keep your pieces held flat. With the amount of heat that's being put into them, there's a good chance that they'll try to pull on you. The welder is turned up pretty high, and one nice thing about welding thick metal like this is that you don't have to baby it near as much as that thinner stuff.
A piece of cardboard will make a good shim to keep our new section off of the floor when we mark our cutoff points. Well, we trimmed that thing off to cut off all that excess that was hanging down. Now we just have to set this up here, weld it up, and it'd be that easy. Now that gives us plenty of room for our exhaust, but that'll have to wait till next time. So you guys come back and see us.